Hold up. That uniform real, or are you just coming from a costume party?
My name is Senior Chief Darnell Carter, United States Navy. I'm traveling under official orders to Washington. I'm happy to show you.
I don't care who you are. Drop the bag. Hands behind your back. Now. Don't make me ask twice.
I'm complying, Sergeant, but I need to know...
At 7:14 a.m., inside Charlotte Douglas International Airport, Senior Chief Darnell Carter walked through the main terminal in full Navy dress whites. He was 43 years old, broad-shouldered, steady on his feet, and carried himself the way only men with more than 2 decades in special operations do. Quiet, controlled, aware of everything. His garment bag hung over his left shoulder. A leather folder with official travel orders was tucked under his right arm. He was heading to Washington, D.C., where in less than 24 hours he would stand before a room of flag officers and receive the Navy Distinguished Service Medal, one of the highest non-combat honors the service could give. His record spoke for itself. 6 combat deployments, a Purple Heart earned in a firefight most Americans would never hear about, a Bronze Star with Valor for actions classified above his own pay grade.
He had spent the better part of his adult life in places the government didn't acknowledge, doing work that kept people safe while they slept. He had bled for his country more times than most people had filed taxes. That morning, he was just a man catching a connecting flight. His uniform was spotless, his ribbons were earned, his orders were signed, and none of it would matter to the officer watching him from across the terminal. Sergeant Kyle Brannigan had been with the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Airport Police for 18 years. He was 44, stocky, with a jaw that always seemed clenched and a posture that dared people to test him. On paper, he was a senior officer with commendations and a clean disciplinary record. Off paper, the picture looked very different. Over the past 14 years, 31 complaints had been filed against Brannigan. Excessive force, racial profiling, verbal intimidation, targeting black and brown travelers for stops that had no legal basis. Every single complaint had been reviewed internally and dismissed. Misunderstanding, inconclusive, unfounded. The language changed, but the outcome never did. 2 officers had previously requested transfers after working alongside him. One had filed a written statement with Human Resources saying Brannigan regularly referred to black passengers as frequent flyers, a term he used with a smirk that made its meaning impossible to miss. Nothing came of it. His partner that morning was Officer Ryan Sutter, 28, 3 years on the job. Sutter was quiet, agreeable, and had never once pushed back on anything Brannigan said or did. He followed orders. He watched. He said nothing. That combination made him exactly the kind of partner Brannigan preferred. Brannigan stood near the TSA checkpoint, coffee in hand, scanning the early morning crowd the way he always did. Not looking for threats, looking for targets. And when his eyes landed on a black man in dress whites walking through his terminal, his expression shifted. He set down the coffee, he straightened his belt, and he started walking. In the 10 minutes before Brannigan moved, at least a dozen travelers had passed through his line of sight. 3 were in military uniform. 2 were white Marines in service Charlies. 1 was a white Army captain in dress greens. Brannigan didn't glance at any of them, didn't shift his weight, didn't reach for his radio. But when Darnell Carter walked past the coffee kiosk in dress whites, ribbons catching the overhead light, Brannigan stepped directly into his path. "Hold up! Where'd you get that uniform?" Carter stopped. His expression stayed neutral. The question registered, but his training held. He kept his hands visible, one on the garment bag strap, the other at his side. "I'm Senior Chief Darnell Carter, United States Navy. I'm on official travel." Brannigan's eyes moved slowly over the ribbons, the rank insignia, the creased white fabric. His lip curled slightly. "Yeah? You got ID for that?" Carter nodded. "Inside pocket. I'll get it for you. Keep your hands where I can see them." Carter didn't move. Brannigan leaned in closer than necessary. "A lot of guys like you buy this stuff online. Ribbons, patches, all of it. You'd be surprised how many people walk through here playing pretend." Carter's jaw tightened, but his voice stayed level. "I have my military ID and sealed travel orders. You're welcome to verify both." Brannigan didn't reach for them, didn't acknowledge the offer. Sutter moved to Carter's right side, blocking the path forward. The two officers now had him boxed in. Travelers slowed. A woman with a rolling bag glanced over. A gate agent at the nearest counter looked up. Carter stood still between them, hands open, posture straight, watching Brannigan's eyes and recognizing something he had seen before in men who had already decided what they were going to do before the conversation started. Brannigan's voice dropped. "Put the bag down. Turn around." Carter lowered the garment bag to the floor and turned slowly, placing his hands behind his back, palms open. "What am I being detained for?" "Shut your mouth." Carter kept his tone measured. "I'm complying with your instructions. I have a right to know why I'm being stopped." Brannigan grabbed Carter's left wrist and wrenched it upward at an angle that forced his shoulder to rotate unnaturally. Carter's breath caught, but he didn't pull away. "I am not resisting," he said clearly, loud enough for anyone within 20 feet to hear. Brannigan yanked harder. "Stop resisting." Carter's body pitched forward from the force. Before he could correct his balance, Brannigan drove him face first into the terminal floor. The sound was immediate and sickening, a hard crack of bone and flesh against polished tile that echoed across the concourse. Sutter dropped a knee onto Carter's upper back without hesitation. Carter's metals ground against the floor. His lips split on impact. A line of blood ran onto the white fabric of his uniform and pooled against the tile. He didn't move, didn't struggle, didn't raise his voice. "I am Senior Chief Darnell Carter," he said through clenched teeth, one cheek pressed flat to the ground. "I am not resisting." Around them, the terminal erupted. A woman screamed. A child near the gate started crying. A businessman dropped his briefcase and pulled out his phone. Within seconds, at least 6 cameras were recording from different angles. And on Brannigan's chest, the red light of his Bodycam blinked steadily, capturing everything he had just done to a man who had done nothing at all. A man in a faded Marine Corps cap pushed through the gathering crowd. He was in his late 60s, tall, with the kind of posture that never fully leaves a person who served. He took one look at Carter on the floor, the dress whites, the ribbons, the blood, and his voice cut through the noise like a command. "That man is a senior chief. You can see his rank from here. What the hell are you doing?" Brannigan didn't look up. "Sir, step back or you'll be next." The Marine held his ground. "I'm a retired colonel, United States Marine Corps. That man is in uniform with rank and ribbons you clearly don't understand. You're assaulting a service member." Brannigan finally looked at him. "I don't care if he's the Secretary of Defense. Back up. Now." Sutter glanced at the colonel, then at the growing crowd, then at the phones. His knee stayed on Carter's back, but his face had changed. Something behind his eyes was catching up to what his body was still doing. A flight attendant near the gate picked up an internal phone and called airport operations. Her voice was tight. "There's an officer on the floor of Concourse C with a man in a Navy uniform pinned down. There's blood. People are recording. You need to send someone now." A teenage girl sitting cross-legged at a charging station had her phone angled low, capturing everything. A woman in scrubs was live-streaming to Facebook, narrating under her breath. A man in a business suit stood motionless, phone raised, jaw open. Carter lay still through all of it. His breathing was controlled. His hands didn't move. His training had taken over completely, the same way it had in rooms and corridors and rooftops in countries most of these people would never visit. He spoke once more, his voice steady despite the blood on his lips. "I am not resisting. I am an active-duty Navy SEAL. You are being recorded." Brannigan leaned down, close enough that his Bodycam picked up every syllable. "I don't care what you call yourself. You're nothing right now." Carter was pulled to his feet by the cuffs, the metal biting into his wrists as Brannigan hauled him upward without warning. His shoulder screamed from the earlier wrench. Blood had dried along his chin and soaked into the collar of his dress whites. The garment bag and leather folder lay on the terminal floor where he'd dropped them. No one picked them up. Brannigan and Sutter walked him down a side corridor, past a maintenance door, and into a windowless security room with a metal table, 2 chairs, and a single overhead light. Brannigan shoved him into a chair and cuffed his right wrist to a steel loop bolted to the table. Carter looked at him. "I need medical attention. My lip is split and my shoulder may be dislocated." "You're fine," Brannigan said. Carter kept his voice level. "I'm requesting medical assistance. I have a right to that." Brannigan leaned against the doorframe. "You've got a right to sit there and wait until I figure out what to do with you." He walked out. Sutter followed. The door closed. Carter sat alone in that room for over 2 hours. No water, no medical attention, no phone call, no explanation of charges. His blood dried brown against white fabric. His shoulder throbbed with every breath. The overhead camera in the corner of the ceiling recorded everything. The stillness, the silence, the patience of a man who had survived things these officers couldn't imagine, now cuffed to a table in his own country. Halfway through the first hour, Brannigan's voice drifted in from the hallway. The ceiling mic caught it with perfect clarity. "Another one playing dress-up. They all do it. Fake rank, fake medals, fake everything." A colleague standing near him shifted uncomfortably, but said nothing. Nobody ever did. That was how it worked. That was how it had always worked. Until now. The door to the holding room opened at 9:41 a.m. The woman who stepped through was not a police officer. Patricia Vance was the airport's operations director, a civilian administrator who had run Charlotte Douglas for 11 years and answered directly to the aviation department and the city. She had been pulled out of a morning briefing by a staff member who told her there was a situation in Concourse C involving a man in a military uniform, blood on the floor, and passengers recording on their phones. She walked into the room and stopped. Carter sat upright in the chair, wrist cuffed to the table, dried blood along his chin and collar, his dress whites stained and scuffed. His posture was still straight. His eyes were clear. He looked at her the way a man looks at someone when he's been waiting a long time for anyone with authority to walk through the door. Vance turned to Brannigan, who had followed her in. "Explain this." Brannigan crossed his arms. Suspicious individual in a military uniform. Possible stolen valor. He refused to comply with a lawful stop. Vance looked back at Carter. "Is that accurate?" "No, ma'am," Carter said. "I identified myself. I offered my military ID and travel orders. I complied with every instruction. I was never shown a reason for the stop. I asked for medical attention and was denied. I've been cuffed to this table for over 2 hours. Vance held out her hand toward Brannigan. "Give me his identification." Brannigan hesitated. "Now, Sergeant." He reached into a plastic bin on the counter and handed over Carter's military ID and the leather folder containing his orders. Vance opened the ID first. The photo matched. The name read Carter Darnell A. Rank, Senior Chief Petty Officer. She unfolded the orders. Official travel, ceremony in Washington, signed by a Rear Admiral. She closed the folder and looked at Brannigan with an expression that made Sutter take a half step back. "This man is an active-duty Navy SEAL with orders signed by a flag officer. Uncuff him immediately." Brannigan didn't move. "I haven't finished processing him." "You're finished," Vance said. "Uncuff him now, or I'm calling the Federal Air Marshal Office and your chief simultaneously." Sutter stepped forward without waiting and unlocked the cuff. Carter flexed his wrist slowly. The skin beneath was raw and red. Vance walked Carter to a private office down the hall, closed the door, and handed him a bottle of water. Then she picked up the phone. Her first call went to Naval Special Warfare Command in Coronado. She identified herself, described the situation, and read Carter's service number directly from his ID. The duty officer on the other end asked her to repeat the details. She did. The line went quiet for 4 seconds. Then the duty officer said, "Hold, please," and transferred her to the command's legal office. Within 30 minutes, NCIS had opened a case file. Within 45, the Department of Defense Office of Inspector General had been notified. Within an hour, a Pentagon liaison was on a direct call with Charlotte-Mecklenburg Airport Police Chief Ronald Durbin. The language was not diplomatic. "You have an active-duty Navy SEAL who was assaulted, racially profiled, denied medical attention, and held without cause for over 2 hours by your officers. This is now a federal matter. Preserve all footage immediately. No officer involved in this incident speaks to anyone outside your department without federal authorization. Durbin sat behind his desk, phone pressed to his ear, staring at the wall. He had run the department for 9 years. He had seen complaints come and go. He had signed off on dismissals that kept officers like Brannigan in uniform because the alternative was paperwork, union battles, and political noise. But this was not a complaint from a passenger who would eventually give up. This was the Pentagon, and the Pentagon did not give up. Durbin called Brannigan into his office that afternoon. The conversation lasted less than 3 minutes. "Badge and weapon," Durbin said, "on my desk before end of shift." Brannigan stared at him. "Chief, I was doing my job." Durbin didn't blink. "Your job just became a federal investigation. Badge, weapon, now." For the first time in 18 years, Kyle Brannigan unclipped his badge, set it on the desk, and walked out of the building without it. The evidence unit pulled the footage that same evening. Brannigan's body cam, Sutter's body cam. 6 terminal security cameras covering Concourse C from different angles. The holding room ceiling camera with audio. Every file was uploaded, time-stamped, and flagged. Internal Affairs received the first batch before midnight. A federal liaison received a secure copy by morning. The body cam footage from Brannigan was the worst of it. Not because the angle was dramatic, but because it was steady, clinical. It showed exactly what he saw when he approached Carter. A black man in dress whites walking through a terminal. It showed the stop, the tone, the proximity. It showed Brannigan's hand grabbing Carter's wrist and wrenching it upward. It captured the moment Carter's face hit the tile, the sharp crack of impact, the way his body went still. It recorded the blood appearing on white fabric. It recorded Brannigan's voice saying, "I don't care what you call yourself. You're nothing right now." Sutter's footage confirmed everything from a second angle. His camera showed Carter's hands open behind his back before the takedown. It showed Carter's mouth moving, repeating the words, "I am not resisting." It showed Sutter dropping his knee onto Carter's back without hesitation, without command, as if it were reflex. The terminal cameras were wider. They captured the crowd, the phones, the retired Marine colonel stepping forward, the flight attendant picking up the internal phone. They showed the 2 white Marines and service Charlies who had passed Brannigan minutes earlier without a glance. They showed the white Army captain who walked the same corridor untouched. And then they showed Carter, the only black service member in the frame, face down on the floor with 2 officers on top of him. But the holding room footage was what made the investigators go quiet. 2 hours and 14 minutes. Carter sitting still, wrist cuffed to the table, blood drying on his face. No one entering the room, no water, no medic, no phone. Just silence and a blinking camera in the corner, recording a man the system had decided didn't matter. An internal affairs investigator paused the playback and looked around the room. This isn't misconduct. This is assault and unlawful imprisonment. And it's on camera from 7 angles. Another investigator leaned back in his chair. Given who he is and who's already involved, this goes federal by morning. It already had. 2 days after the incident, a secure briefing was held inside the Pentagon. The room was small, windowless, and restricted to senior staff from the Office of the Secretary of Defense, the Department of Defense Office of General Counsel, and Naval Special Warfare Command Legal. A screen at the front of the room displayed a single still image pulled from Brannigan's body cam. It showed Carter's face pressed against the terminal floor, his lips split, blood on white fabric, Brannigan's knee planted between his shoulder blades. The ribbons on Carter's chest, including the Purple Heart and Bronze Star with Valor, were partially visible beneath the officer's weight. The room was silent for several seconds. A senior defense official spoke first. "Who is this man's commanding officer?" A staffer answered. "Captain Edward Knoll, Naval Special Warfare Group 4. He's been briefed. He's requesting the department take formal action on behalf of his operator." The official nodded. And the officers? 2, sir. Sergeant Kyle Brannigan, 18 years on the job, 31 prior complaints, all dismissed. His partner, Officer Ryan Sutter, 3 years, no independent action taken during the incident. The official stared at the image. This man has served on operations that will never carry his name. He has bled in places this country will never acknowledge. And 2 men with badges treated him like he was less than human in a public airport because of the color of his skin. This will be answered. Later that day, the Department of Defense released a formal public statement. It read in part, "The Department of Defense considers the treatment of Senior Chief Darnell Carter to be a grave violation of his civil rights and an affront to every man and woman who wears the uniform of the United States Armed Forces. We are cooperating fully with federal investigators and expect complete accountability at every level." Behind closed doors, the language carried more weight. A JAG officer stood before a room of Pentagon lawyers and said, "If this had happened overseas to a foreign national in our custody, we'd call it a violation of the Geneva Conventions. It happened here, to one of ours, in an American airport, while he was wearing the uniform he earned. There is no version of this where anyone walks away clean." Federal investigators arrived in Charlotte 3 days after the Pentagon briefing. NCIS agents and a Department of Justice civil rights team set up in a conference room at the airport police headquarters and began pulling everything. Every complaint ever filed against Brannigan, every incident report he had written, every Bodycam file attached to his name, every internal affairs review that had cleared him, every email between supervisors that mentioned his conduct. What they found was not a single bad day. It was a system. 31 complaints over 14 years. Every one of them involved a black or brown traveler. The pattern was identical each time. A stop with no legal basis, aggressive language, physical intimidation, and a report filed afterward that described the encounter in terms designed to justify what had already happened. Resisted verbal commands, displayed hostile body language, matched a description. The same phrases recycled again and again, always accepted, never questioned. Bodycam footage from 14 prior incidents was still on file. Investigators reviewed each one. In 6 of them, Brannigan could be heard using language that federal prosecutors would later classify as racially motivated. In one, he told a black business traveler in a suit, "You people always have a story." In another, he grabbed a young black airman by the collar and shoved him against a wall for walking too slowly through a security corridor. The airman had filed a complaint. It was dismissed in 11 days. Internal emails made the picture worse. Chief Durbin had been personally copied on at least 9 complaints over the past 6 years. In each case, he had signed off on the dismissal without requesting additional review. A lieutenant named Grace Halpern had written a formal memo 2 years earlier warning that Brannigan was a liability waiting to explode and recommending he be reassigned to a non-public-facing role. The memo was acknowledged by Durbin's office. No action was taken. 3 former officers gave voluntary statements to federal investigators. One said, "Everyone on that force knew what Brannigan was. We watched it happen. We filed what we could. Nothing ever changed." Another said, "If you were black and you walked through his terminal, it was only a matter of time." A third, a woman who had transferred out after 7 months, said simply, "I left because I couldn't stand next to him and call myself a good cop." The termination letters were issued within 6 weeks of the incident. Sergeant Kyle Brannigan was fired for gross misconduct, excessive force, racial discrimination, unlawful detention, denial of medical assistance to a detained individual, and falsifying his official report of the encounter with Senior Chief Carter. His law enforcement certification was permanently revoked by the State Certification Board following an emergency review. He was barred from holding any policing role in the state of North Carolina. Officer Ryan Sutter was terminated for failure to intervene during an unlawful use of force, failure to render aid to an injured detainee, and complicity in unlawful detention. His certification was suspended indefinitely. His career in law enforcement was over before he turned 29.
Chief Ronald Durbin did not wait for the federal investigation to finish. He resigned 4 days after investigators presented evidence that he had personally suppressed at least 9 complaints against Brannigan over a 6-year period. His resignation letter cited personal reasons. No one believed it. Lieutenant Grace Halpern, the officer who had written the ignored memo warning about Brannigan 2 years earlier, was quietly promoted to captain. 2 supervisors who had signed off on complaint dismissals were demoted and reassigned to administrative roles with no public-facing duties. A 3rd retired before the disciplinary process reached him. The Charlotte-Mecklenburg Airport Police Department entered into a federal consent decree, the most severe form of federal oversight available. Under its terms, an independent monitor would oversee all use-of-force incidents, complaint investigations, hiring practices, and bias training for a minimum of 5 years. Every body cam file from every interaction would be subject to random audit. Every complaint would be reviewed by an external board before it could be closed. The department that had spent 14 years burying Kyle Brannigan's record was now required to answer for every file it had ever sealed. And the man who had worn the badge the longest without consequence was now the reason none of them could operate without federal supervision. The Department of Justice Civil Rights Division filed federal criminal charges 8 weeks after the incident. Brannigan was charged with assault under color of law, deprivation of civil rights, unlawful imprisonment, and filing a false report. Sutter was charged with conspiracy to deprive civil rights and failure to intervene. Both were arrested at their homes on a Tuesday morning. Brannigan said nothing as he was cuffed. Sutter cried. The trial lasted 2 weeks. On the first day, prosecutors played Brannigan's body cam footage from start to finish. The courtroom watched Carter walk through the terminal, watched Brannigan step into his path, watched the stop, the language, the wrench, the slam, watched blood appear on white fabric. Watch Carter say through clenched teeth, "I am not resisting." When the holding room footage played, 2 jurors looked away. 2 hours and 14 minutes. A man cuffed to a table with blood drying on his face. No water, no medic, just silence and a blinking camera. Carter testified on the 4th day. Calm, precise, the same composure he had shown on the terminal floor. He said, "I did not resist. I identified myself. I offered my credentials. I was assaulted because of the color of my skin." Brannigan's defense argued Carter's size was intimidating and his tone confrontational. 7 camera angles and audio from every recording destroyed both claims in minutes. The jury deliberated 4 hours. Guilty on all counts. Both men. The judge looked at Brannigan for a long time before speaking. "You did not protect and serve. You attacked and degraded. And you did it to a man who has given more to this country than you will ever understand." Brannigan received 6 years. Sutter received 2. Neither apologized. Neither showed remorse. Outside the courthouse, Carter stood on the steps in dress whites. He didn't speak to reporters. The footage had said everything. Carter filed his federal civil rights lawsuit 3 days after the verdict. The complaint named Brannigan, Sutter, former Chief Durbin, the Airport Police Department, the Airport Authority, and the City of Charlotte. Assault, unlawful detention, denial of medical care, racial profiling, false imprisonment, institutional cover-up spanning 14 years. His attorney, Adrian Locke, a former federal prosecutor with 15 years in civil rights litigation, reviewed the evidence and told Carter, "This is the clearest case I've ever seen, and the most damning." Discovery confirmed what investigators had already found. Emails showed Durbin dismissing complaints with one-line replies. One exchange between a lieutenant and Durbin read, "Another complaint on Brannigan from a black passenger. Same pattern. Flag it or file it." Durbin's response was 2 words, "File it." 11 prior victims came forward with statements that mirrored Carter's almost exactly. The stops, the language, the aggression, the reports that twisted what happened into something the department could dismiss. The city's attorneys tried to settle early. Locke rejected their first offer without a counter. "You're not buying silence. You're answering for 14 years of failure." The case settled 6 weeks before trial for $20 million, one of the largest individual civil rights settlements in North Carolina history. The terms went beyond money. A formal public apology read into the city council record. A complete overhaul of use of force and complaint review policies. And a named scholarship fund, the Carter Justice Fellowship, for minority students pursuing criminal justice degrees.
Locke stood beside Carter when the settlement was announced. She said only, "The system didn't work for 14 years. It worked today because a man refused to be erased, and the evidence was impossible to destroy." Weeks later, Senior Chief Darnell Carter walked through another airport. Same dress whites, same ribbons, same posture. He carried his garment bag over one shoulder and his orders under his arm the way he always had. No one stopped him. No one questioned whether he belonged. He boarded his flight, sat by the window, and watched the runway fall away beneath him. Back in Charlotte, the department that had protected Kyle Brannigan for 18 years was learning how to operate under federal supervision. Every use of force report reviewed by an independent monitor, every complaint tracked by an external board, every body cam file subject to random audit. The officers who remained understood that the rules had changed, not because the department had chosen to be better, but because a federal judge had ordered it. Brannigan sat in a federal prison cell. His badge was gone. His certification was revoked. His name returned nothing on a search engine except articles about what he had done on a terminal floor to a man who had never raised his voice. Sutter served his sentence in a separate facility. He never gave a public statement, never explained why he dropped his knee onto a compliant man's back without being told to. The silence that had defined his partnership with Brannigan followed him through the prison doors. A training bulletin was distributed to every officer in the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Airport Police Department the month after sentencing. It showed a single still frame from Brannigan's body cam. Carter's face pressed to the tile. Blood on white fabric. A knee between his shoulder blades. Beneath the image, one line. This is what failure looks like. No names were printed. They didn't need to be. The careers were already gone. The badge numbers were already retired. And the man in the white uniform was still serving his country. Not because the system had protected him. This case was brutal, but the case on the right spirals completely out of control.
Registered in your name?
Federal judge.
A $200,000 Maybach?
You can
Did you
verify.
hit the lottery, find a sugar daddy, or did your drug dealer boyfriend buy it for you before you got locked
I
up?
purchased this vehicle with my own salary. I've been a federal judge for 11 years.
11.
At 9:15 p.m. on a Friday evening, on a quiet residential boulevard just south of the Briarfield city limits, a brand new black Mercedes Maybach S-Class rolled through a green light at normal speed, signaling properly, staying perfectly in its lane. Behind the wheel was a black woman in her early 50s, dressed in a tailored charcoal blazer over a navy silk blouse. Her name was Vivian Alston Drake. She was 53 years old. She was a sitting judge on the United States Court of Appeals for the Fourth Circuit, one of the most powerful judicial positions in the country, one level below the Supreme Court. She had held the seat for 11 years, confirmed by the Senate, appointed by the President. Her rulings had shaped federal law across 5 states. She was driving home after a judicial conference dinner where she had delivered the keynote address. None of that would matter in the next 4 minutes. Officer Craig Dutton sat in his cruiser in a darkened turnout between 2 hedgerows, running plates on passing vehicles. He was 42 years old, 16 years on the force with the Briarfield Police Department, and known among certain colleagues as thorough, a word that meant something very different depending on who you asked. He had a reputation for stopping vehicles that looked out of place, which, in practice, meant black drivers and cars he decided were too expensive for them. His partner that night was Officer Nick Salerno, 29, 5 years on the job, riding shotgun and saying nothing, the way he always did when Dutton was behind the wheel. Dutton's eyes locked onto the Maybach as it passed under a streetlight. He ran the plates. The car came back clean, registered, no warrants, no flags, nothing. He pulled her over anyway. Dutton approached the driver's side window with his flashlight aimed directly into her face. Not at the window,
not at the vehicle, into her eyes. Judge Alston Drake raised one hand slightly to block the glare. Dutton didn't lower the beam. "License and registration," he said before she could speak. His tone wasn't a request. It was a command issued to someone he had already decided didn't belong in this car. Judge Alston Drake reached into her console slowly, retrieved her documents, and handed them through the window. "I'm Judge Vivian Alston Drake. I sit on the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals. I'm on my way home from a work event." Dutton took the documents without looking at them. He glanced back at Salerno and said it loud enough for the dashcam to pick up every syllable. "Yeah, and I'm the Pope." Salerno let out a short laugh. Dutton turned back to her. "This your car?" "Yes, it is. It's registered in my name." Dutton leaned closer. "You'd be surprised how many stolen vehicles get registered under fake names. People do it all the time." She met his eyes. "Officer, you can run the VIN right now. This car has been registered to me for 2 years. I can also provide my judicial identification." Dutton ignored the offer. He straightened up and tapped the roof of the Maybach twice with his open palm. "Step out of the vehicle." "For what reason?" Judge Alston Drake asked. "Because I told you to." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she looked at the dash cam mounted on the cruiser behind her, its red light steady and recording. She unfastened her seatbelt, opened the door slowly, and stepped onto the curb, hands visible, every movement controlled. Across the street, a light turned on in a second-floor window. Someone had started recording. Judge Alston Drake stood on the curb with her hands at her sides, palms open, posture straight. She had stepped out of the vehicle without resistance, without raising her voice, without making a single movement that could be misread. Dutton didn't care. "Put your hands on the hood," he said. She looked at him. "On what grounds?" "You're being detained for investigation of a stolen vehicle." "Officer, you already ran the plates. The car is registered. It's clean. You know that." Dutton stepped closer. "I said hands on the hood." She complied, slowly, deliberately, palms flat against the warm metal of her own car. Salerno moved in behind her and began patting her down. His hands were rough, pulling at the blazer, pressing into her sides, running down her legs with more force than any standard procedure required. She stared straight ahead, jaw tight, saying nothing. While Salerno searched her, Dutton opened the rear door of the Maybach without asking and without consent. He rifled through the back seat, pushing aside a leather briefcase and a garment bag. He unzipped the bag and pulled out what was inside. A federal judicial robe. Black, pressed, with the official seal visible on the hanger. Dutton held it up, looked at it for a moment, then turned to Salerno with a grin. "Halloween's not for 6 months," Salerno laughed. The robe hung in the night air between them, like a punchline to a joke only they found funny. Judge Alston Drake turned her head slightly. "That is a federal judicial robe issued to me by the United States courts." Dutton tossed it back into the car. "Sure it is." Across the street, the neighbor in the second-floor window adjusted her phone and kept recording. She had been watching since the lights first flashed. She hadn't stopped. Judge Alston Drake's voice was firm but controlled. "Officer, I am invoking my rights. This stop is unlawful. I want your badge numbers, both of you." Dutton's expression changed. The smirk disappeared. Something harder replaced it. "You don't give orders out here." "I do." She didn't flinch. "I'm making a lawful request." Dutton grabbed her arm and spun her around hard. Her body hit the side of the Maybach and the momentum carried her forehead straight into the edge of the roof frame. The sound was sharp. A cut opened above her left eyebrow. Blood ran down the side of her face, catching the light from the cruiser's headlamps. She didn't cry out. She didn't resist. Her jaw locked. Her breathing stayed controlled. She pressed her lips together and stared at the hood of the car as Dutton wrenched her wrists behind her back and snapped the cuffs on. He cinched them tight, tighter than necessary. The metal dug into her skin. "You're under arrest," Dutton said. resisting arrest, obstruction of justice, suspicion of possession of a stolen vehicle. She had not resisted. She had not obstructed anything. The vehicle was hers. Every charge was fabricated, and every second of it was being captured. The dash cam on the cruiser recorded the entire sequence. The neighbor's phone across the street caught the angle from above. Salerno stood 2 steps back, weight shifting from one foot to the other, hands at his belt. He said nothing. He did nothing. He watched a woman bleed from her forehead, in handcuffs, on the side of a road she had driven 1,000 times, and he did not intervene. Judge Alston Drake spoke once more, her voice quiet and steady, despite the blood now reaching her chin. "You have no idea what you've just done." Dutton opened the rear door of the cruiser and guided Judge Alston Drake inside with a hand on the back of her head, pushing harder than necessary. She sat in silence for the entire ride to the Briarfield precinct, blood drying on the left side of her face, wrists aching behind her back. The cut above her eyebrow had slowed, but not stopped. No one offered her a tissue. No one offered her anything. At the precinct, Dutton walked her through the side entrance and handed her off to the desk sergeant, a man named Foley who had been processing arrests for 20 years and treated this one like every other. Name, date of birth, address. Judge Alston Drake answered each question calmly. Then she said, "I am a sitting federal judge on the United States Court of Appeals for the Fourth Circuit. I need to make a phone call." Foley looked at her for a moment, then at the dried blood on her face, then at the booking sheet. He wrote nothing down about the title. He didn't ask follow-up questions. He fingerprinted her. He photographed her. The camera flash lit up the cut above her eye and the swelling that had begun to darken around it. Then he walked her to a holding cell and closed the door. She asked again for her phone call. Foley told her she'd get it when they were ready. She sat on the metal bench in the cell, back straight, hands folded in her lap, blazer stained with her own blood. She waited. 93 minutes passed before Foley returned and led her to the phone mounted on the wall outside the holding area. She picked up the receiver, dialed a number from memory, and waited for the line to connect. The man who answered was Chief Judge Nathaniel Booker of the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals, her direct superior, one of the highest-ranking judges in the federal judiciary. Chief Judge Nathaniel Booker answered his phone at 11:47 p.m. He had been asleep for less than an hour. The voice on the other end was one he recognized immediately. Judge Alston Drake spoke for less than 2 minutes. She told him where she was. She told him what happened. She told him about the stop, the search, the robe, the cuffs, the cut on her face, and the 93 minutes she spent in a holding cell before being allowed to call. Booker asked one question. "Are you still in custody?" "Yes." He hung up. Within 4 minutes, Booker called the United States Marshal Service, the agency constitutionally responsible for the protection of the federal judiciary. He gave them the precinct address and the name of the judge being held. Within 6 minutes, he called the Department of Justice Office of the Inspector General. Within 9 minutes, he was on the line with the FBI's Civil Rights Division. He then called the Administrative Office of the United States Courts to formally report that a confirmed sitting appellate judge had been subjected to unlawful arrest, physical injury, and denial of basic rights while in municipal custody. Each call was short, precise, and delivered with the kind of authority that moved people out of beds and into offices at midnight. A federal appellate judge had been pulled from her own car, searched without cause, handcuffed hard enough to bleed, charged with fabricated crimes, and locked in a cell while 2 officers laughed about her judicial robe. By midnight, phones were ringing in 3 federal agencies across Washington, D.C., and in the Briarfield precinct, where Dutton had already gone home for the night and Salerno was finishing his shift report, no one yet understood that what had happened on that quiet boulevard was no longer a local arrest. It was a federal crisis. At 12:20 a.m., 2 men in dark suits walked through the front entrance of the Briarfield precinct and placed federal credentials on the front desk. United States Marshal Service. We're here for Judge Vivian Alston Drake. Release her immediately." The officer at the desk stared at the badges, then at the men, then picked up the phone. Lieutenant Gavin Price, the night shift commander, came out of the back hallway within a minute. He was in his late 40s, career law enforcement, and in all his years he had never had U.S. Marshals standing in his lobby at midnight. He asked what this was about. One of the marshals repeated it. "You are holding a sitting federal appellate judge. She is to be released now." Price went to the booking log. He pulled Dutton's arrest report. He read the charges: resisting arrest, obstruction, stolen vehicle. Then he pulled the dash cam footage and went into his office. He closed the door. He was inside for 11 minutes. When he came out, the color had drained from his face. He looked at the desk sergeant. "Release her, now." Then he picked up the phone and called Dutton and Salerno at their homes. "Both of you, back to the station, tonight." Judge Alston Drake walked out of the holding area, still wearing the blazer, stained with her own blood. One of the marshals stepped forward. "Your Honor, are you all right?" She nodded once. The second marshal took out a camera and began photographing her injuries. The cut above her left eyebrow, now swollen and dark. The bruising on both wrists where the cuffs had been cinched too tight. The abrasions on her palms from where Salerno had pressed her hands into the hood. Each photograph was time-stamped. Each one would become evidence. Judge Alston Drake stood still through all of it, the same composure she had carried from the moment Dutton first aimed his flashlight into her eyes. The FBI secured all dash cam and body cam footage from both officers before sunrise. The files were copied, cataloged, and transferred to a secure federal server. No edits, no gaps, no malfunctions. Every second accounted for. The footage showed everything. It showed Dutton running the plates before the stop and the screen returning clean. It showed him pulling her over anyway. It showed the flashlight in her face, the demand for documents, the moment she identified herself as a federal judge. It showed Dutton turning to Salerno and saying, "Yeah, and I'm the Pope." It showed the pat-down. It showed Dutton opening the rear door without consent, unzipping the garment bag, holding up the judicial robe, and laughing. Halloween's not for 6 months. It showed him spinning her into the car frame. It showed the blood. It showed Salerno standing behind them, doing nothing. And it showed every fabricated charge being spoken aloud into the night air as if they were fact. Internal Affairs was ordered to pull Dutton's full service record. What came back was a history the department had spent years choosing to ignore. 19 complaints over 12 years. Nearly all filed by black residents. Nearly all dismissed as inconclusive or unfounded. 7 of those complaints involved the same scenario. Black drivers in luxury vehicles stopped without cause, questioned aggressively, accused of driving stolen cars that turned out to be legally registered and rightfully owned. One woman had filed twice. A retired school principal stopped in her Lexus 6 blocks from her own home. Both complaints were buried. The pattern was not subtle. It was not ambiguous. It was documented, exposed, and now sitting on the desks of federal investigators who had no interest in looking the other way. Within 24 hours, Officer Craig Dutton was placed on unpaid suspension. His badge was collected, his firearm was confiscated. His access to department systems was revoked. Salerno received the same. Neither officer was given a timeline for return. Dutton sat in his kitchen that afternoon and called his union representative, a man named Philip Correa, who had handled grievances and disciplinary defenses for 18 years. Dutton walked him through the stop, the search, the arrest. He spoke with the tone of a man who still believed he had done nothing wrong. When he finished, the line was quiet. Correa finally spoke. "Craig, she's a federal appellate judge." Dutton said nothing. Correa continued, "This isn't a complaint from a citizen we can negotiate down. This is the federal judiciary. The FBI is involved. The marshals showed up at your station. I'll represent you through the process, but I need you to understand something. This is beyond what the union can protect." Dutton hung up without responding. By day 2, a spokesperson for the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals confirmed to local media that a sitting appellate judge had been unlawfully arrested, physically injured, and held in a municipal facility without cause. By day 3, Dutton's name was public. His department photograph circulated across news sites and social media. The neighbor who had recorded from her second-floor window uploaded her footage. It showed the stop from above, the pat-down, the moment Dutton held up the robe and laughed, the arrest, the blood. The video reached 2 million views in 48 hours. And then the voices started. Neighbors who had watched Dutton patrol their streets for years, former colleagues who had seen the stops and said nothing, and the people he had pulled over, one by one, they began talking publicly, telling stories that sounded exactly the same. The FBI Civil Rights Division and the Department of Justice opened parallel investigations within the first week. Subpoenas were issued for every traffic stop Dutton had initiated over the past 5 years. Every report, every dashcam file, every dispatch record. The data came back in volume, and when federal analysts ran the numbers, the pattern was overwhelming. Of all vehicle stops Dutton had conducted in that period, 78% involved black drivers. The district he patrolled was 40% black. The disparity alone was damning. But it got worse. When analysts isolated stops involving luxury vehicles, the number climbed to 91%. 9 out of every 10 drivers Dutton pulled over in a high-end car were black. The justifications in his reports repeated like a script. Vehicle appeared inconsistent with the area. Driver matched general description. Suspected stolen vehicle. The same language, the same baseless accusations, applied over and over again to people whose only offense was driving a car that Dutton decided they shouldn't own. Federal investigators fanned out across the district and interviewed 14 prior victims. Their accounts were nearly identical. Stopped without cause. Accused of driving a stolen vehicle. Ordered out of the car. Searched aggressively. Spoken to with language that left no doubt about what motivated the stop. A cardiologist stopped in his BMW on the way to the hospital. A retired teacher pulled over twice in 6 months in her Lexus. A college student detained for 40 minutes in his mother's Audi while Dutton called for backup that was never needed. 3 of those 14 victims had filed formal complaints with the Briarfield Police Department. All 3 complaints had been marked as unfounded and buried in departmental files. The investigators pulled those files too. They read every word, and they added them to the case. A federal grand jury was convened 6 weeks after the arrest. The proceedings were closed, but what emerged from them was public and devastating. Officer Craig Gutton was indicted on multiple federal charges: deprivation of rights under color of law, 18 U.S.C. Section 242. Conspiracy against rights, 18 U.S.C. Section 241. Assault. False arrest. Falsifying a police report. Obstruction of justice. Each charge carried federal weight. Each one had been built on footage, records, and testimony that left no room for ambiguity. Officer Nick Salerno was indicted as a co-conspirator. The grand jury found that he had failed to intervene during the unlawful stop, stood by during the use of force, and then corroborated Dutton's false arrest report, signing his name to a document he knew contained fabricated charges. His silence on that curb had been a choice. The indictment made clear that the federal government considered it a criminal one. But the indictments did not stop with the officers. 2 internal affairs supervisors within the Briarfield Police Department were also named. Sergeant Dale Overstreet and Lieutenant Irene Faulkner had directly handled prior complaints against Dutton. 3 formal complaints involving black drivers stopped in luxury vehicles had crossed their desks over a span of 4 years. All 3 had been classified as unfounded. All 3 files showed minimal investigation, no witness follow-up, and conclusions that contradicted the written statements attached to them. Federal prosecutors argued that Overstreet and Faulkner had not simply failed to act. They had actively suppressed evidence of a pattern of racial discrimination, enabling Dutton to continue targeting black drivers with the department's implicit protection. The grand jury agreed. Both were charged with conspiracy and obstruction. When the indictments were unsealed, the Briarfield Police Department issued no public statement. The silence said enough. 3 weeks after the indictments, Judge Vivian Alston Drake filed a federal civil rights lawsuit in the amount of $35 million. The defendants named were Officer Craig Dutton, Officer Nick Salerno, the Briarfield Police Department, and the City of Briarfield. The complaint was 94 pages long. It alleged racial profiling, excessive force, false arrest, malicious prosecution, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and systemic departmental failure to identify, address, and correct known patterns of racial discrimination within its ranks. Her legal team included 2 former prosecutors from the Department of Justice Civil Rights Division and a constitutional law specialist who had argued before the Supreme Court. They did not file this lawsuit to negotiate quietly. They filed it to set a precedent. The suit named the 47 other identified victims of Dutton's stops as part of a broader pattern and practice claim, arguing that the department had not merely tolerated one officer's bias, but had built an institutional culture that rewarded it. Discovery began immediately, and what it uncovered made the arrest on the boulevard look like the surface of something far deeper. Internal department emails showed officers joking openly about driving while black stops. One message thread between 3 patrol officers included the phrase, "Another one who can't explain the nice car." A supervisor's memo distributed to the traffic division 2 years earlier instructed officers to be proactive about out-of-place vehicles in affluent areas. The memo used no racial language directly, but the lawsuit argued what the data already proved. Out of place meant black. The memo had been signed by Lieutenant Irene Faulkner, the same supervisor now facing federal charges for burying complaints. The city's attorneys reviewed the discovery materials and requested an emergency closed-door session with the mayor's office. The door stayed closed for 3 hours. When it opened, no one was smiling. The trial lasted 4 weeks. It was held in federal court, 60 miles from Briarfield, before a judge who had no connection to the local department and a jury drawn from across the district. The prosecution opened with the dash cam footage. They played it in full, unedited, from the moment Dutton ran the plates to the moment Judge Alston Drake was placed in the back of the cruiser with blood running down her face. They played it again during witness testimony. They played it a 3rd time during closing arguments. Each time, the courtroom was silent. Prior victims took the stand one by one. The cardiologist stopped in his BMW, described being ordered to his knees on the shoulder of a highway. The retired teacher told the jury about being pulled over twice in 6 months and accused both times of stealing her own car. The college student described sitting in handcuffs for 40 minutes in his mother's Audi while Dutton searched the trunk and found nothing. Their stories were different in detail, but identical in pattern. Use of force experts dismantled every justification the defense offered. There was no legal basis for the stop, no probable cause for the search, no justification for physical force against a compliant subject. Every expert reached the same conclusion. This was not policing. This was targeting. Dutton took the stand on the 3rd week. He said he was following instinct and training. Under cross-examination, he could not explain why the clean registration didn't end the stop. He could not explain why he searched the vehicle without consent. He could not explain why he used force on a woman who had not resisted. He could not explain the robe. He could not explain the joke. The jury deliberated for less than a day. Guilty on all counts. Dutton was sentenced to 7 years in federal prison. Salerno, who had cooperated with prosecutors and testified against Dutton, received 18 months. Sergeant Dale Overstreet and Lieutenant Irene Faulkner received suspended sentences and were permanently barred from working in law enforcement in any capacity. The city of Briarfield settled the civil lawsuit for $35 million. It was the largest police misconduct settlement in the state's history. The city chose not to go to trial. Their own attorneys had reviewed the dashcam footage, the internal emails, the buried complaints, and the supervisor's memo about out-of-place vehicles. They knew what a jury would see. They knew what it would cost if they fought and lost. $35 million was the price of ending it before it got worse. But the money was only part of it. The settlement included a mandatory reform agreement that would reshape the Briarfield Police Department from the inside. An independent civilian oversight board was established, with full subpoena power and the authority to investigate misconduct complaints without departmental approval. Mandatory racial bias testing was required for every officer every quarter, with results reviewed by the Oversight Board. The department's traffic stop policies were overhauled entirely. Officers were now required to document specific, articulable reasons for every stop before initiating contact. Real-time dashcam review protocols were implemented, with supervisors required to audit a random sample of footage weekly. A public database of officer complaint histories was created, accessible to any citizen, searchable by name, badge number, and incident type. And a $5 million compensation fund was established specifically for Dutton's prior victims, the people who had filed complaints that went nowhere, who had been stopped and searched and humiliated and told it was routine. The Briarfield police chief resigned 3 days after the settlement was announced. He issued a statement about new challenges and the need for fresh leadership. No one believed it. 3 senior commanders were demoted or forced into early retirement. 2 of them had directly supervised Dutton for more than a decade. Neither had ever flagged a single one of his stops for review. The department that had protected Craig Dutton for 16 years was being dismantled and rebuilt. Not from the outside, from within its own failure. Judge Vivian Alston Drake returned to the bench 5 weeks after the settlement was finalized. She did not hold a press conference. She did not appear on cable news. She did not write an op-ed or sit for a magazine profile. She issued a single written statement through the Administrative Office of the United States Courts. It read in part, "No one is above the law, including those who enforce it. The Constitution does not have a dress code, a vehicle requirement, or a skin color." That was the only public comment she ever made about the case. It was enough. Craig Dutton reported to a federal correctional facility to begin his 7-year sentence. He did not address the court before sentencing beyond what was legally required. He did not apologize to Judge Alston Drake. He did not apologize to the 47 other victims. He did not acknowledge that what he had done on that boulevard was anything other than his job. His law enforcement certification was permanently revoked. He was barred from holding any position of public trust in the state. His name, his photograph, and his case file became permanent entries in a federal civil rights database. No department would ever consider him again. Nick Salerno served his 18 months, was released, and left law enforcement entirely. He relocated out of state. He never spoke publicly about the case or about Dutton. He disappeared into a life that no longer carried a badge, though the record of what he failed to do on that curb would follow him permanently. The case was adopted as required study material in police academies and law schools across the country. It was cited in federal training briefs on racial profiling, use of force accountability, and the consequences of institutional silence. Judge Alston Drake used a portion of the settlement to quietly fund a legal defense initiative providing representation to victims of racially motivated traffic stops who could not afford attorneys. She never attached her name to it publicly. A year after the verdict, on an ordinary Tuesday evening, Judge Alston Drake walked through a courthouse parking garage, opened the door of her black Mercedes Maybach, placed her briefcase on the passenger seat, and drove home. No one stopped her. No one questioned whether the car was hers. This case was disturbing, but the one on the right ends in a way no one expects.
Hand on the ground, now, don't move!
What is this about?
I don't care what you say you are. Around here, I give the orders. You probably bought that badge online, boy.
I am Deputy U.S. Marshal Elijah Drummond. Check my credentials.
You don't belong here. I don't care who you are. Move.
At 6:14 a.m. on a quiet residential street in suburban Virginia, Deputy U.S. Marshal Elijah Drummond was loading his duty bag into the back of his SUV. He was 43 years old,
dressed in a navy polo and pressed slacks, heading to the federal courthouse for a fugitive task force briefing he had attended every Monday morning for the past 6 years. The street was still. Sprinklers ticked across lawns. A few porch lights glowed in the early gray. It was the kind of neighborhood where nothing ever happened. Then, 4 black SUVs with ICE enforcement and removal operations markings rolled onto Birchwood Lane and stopped in a staggered formation that blocked both ends of the street. 6 agents stepped out in tactical vests, sidearms drawn or resting on holsters, moving with the kind of aggressive urgency reserved for high-value fugitive operations. The lead agent, Supervisory Detention and Deportation Officer Vincent Harlow, 46, crossed the pavement in 5 hard strides, pointed directly at Elijah, and shouted, "Get on the ground, now!" No warrant was produced, no name was called, no address was confirmed. No questions were asked, just a black man standing in his own driveway in a neighborhood where, in Harlow's eyes, he didn't belong. Elijah turned slowly, his hands visible, his expression calm but alert. His training was already working. He scanned the agents, counted the weapons, measured the distance to his front door where his wife and 2 sons were still sleeping. He did not reach for anything. He did not raise his voice. He said 4 words. "What is this about?" Harlow didn't answer. What none of them knew, what none of them had bothered to check, was that mounted beneath the eaves of Elijah's home were 4 high-definition security cameras, audio-enabled, motion-activated, recording everything from the moment the first vehicle turned onto the street. Every word, every movement, every second of what was about to happen was already being preserved. Elijah Drummond had spent 21 years in federal law enforcement. He started at 22 as a correctional officer at a federal detention center in North Carolina, working double shifts in maximum security units where inmates tested every new guard who walked the tier. He lasted 3 years, earned a reputation for being unshakable, and applied to the U.S. Marshal Service. He was accepted on his first try. Over the next 18 years, he climbed through the ranks with the kind of steady, unspectacular discipline that defined the best federal officers. He worked prisoner transport, courthouse security, and witness protection assignments before landing on a district fugitive task force that operated alongside the FBI, DEA, and ATF. He had personally arrested more federal fugitives than most agents would see in an entire career. The Department of Justice had commended him twice, once for a multi-state manhunt that ended without a single shot fired, and once for a protective detail he ran for a federal judge who had received credible death threats. At home, he lived in a 4-bedroom house on Birchwood Lane with his wife Corinne, 40, a school principal known across the district for turning around 2 underperforming elementary schools. Their sons, Nolan, 14, and Isaiah, 11, played football and brought home honor roll certificates that covered half the refrigerator door. The Drummonds were one of 3 black families on the block. Their neighbors knew them, respected them. Elijah coached youth football on weekends and helped organize the annual block party every 4th of July. He was, by every measure anyone cared to use, the kind of man who represented the absolute best of federal service. And none of that mattered to the 6 agents standing in his driveway, because they never asked. Vincent Harlow had been in federal immigration enforcement for 18 years, starting with the former Immigration and Naturalization Service before it was folded into ICE under the Department of Homeland Security. In that time, he had built a reputation that depended entirely on who you asked. His supervisors called him driven and results-oriented. His peers used different words: aggressive, territorial, impossible to check. He ran his field unit like it answered to no one, rarely coordinating with other federal agencies, often launching operations based on tips that were vague, unverified, or outright wrong. 7 formal complaints had been filed against him over 12 years. 4 alleged racial profiling during community enforcement sweeps, with residents describing stops that had no legal basis and targeted people based on skin color alone. 2 involved excessive force during arrests, including one where a detained man suffered a dislocated shoulder
after Harlow wrenched his arm behind his back during a compliant surrender. The seventh complaint alleged that Harlow had falsified details in an operational report to justify a warrantless entry into a private home. Every single complaint was investigated internally. Every single one was closed with no sustained findings. Harlow had learned the same lesson that men like him always learned when the system refused to correct them: that he could do whatever he wanted. His team reinforced that belief. Officer Dwayne Pettis, 34, had been with ICE for 6 years and had spent the last 3 assigned directly under Harlow. He followed orders without hesitation, backed every report without question, and had never once filed a dissenting account of any operation. The 4 remaining agents in the unit operated the same way: quiet, compliant, unwilling to challenge the man who controlled their schedules, their evaluations, and their careers. Harlow had never been suspended, never been demoted, never been forced to answer for the damage his operations left behind. He had operated for nearly 2 decades without a single real consequence. That morning on Birchwood Lane, standing in a deputy U.S. Marshal's driveway with no warrant in his hand and 6 cameras recording his every move, that streak was about to end. Harlow closed the distance between himself and Elijah in 3 steps, his right hand resting on the grip of his holstered sidearm, his left hand pointing at the ground. "I said get down. Show me ID. Now." Elijah stood still. His hands were open at his sides, fingers spread, posture deliberately non-threatening. Every instinct built over 2 decades of federal law enforcement told him exactly what was happening and exactly how to survive it. "I'm a federal law enforcement officer," Elijah said. His voice was calm, measured, the tone of a man who had talked down armed fugitives in rooms far more dangerous than his own driveway. "I need to know what this is about." Harlow ignored him. "Put your hands on the vehicle. Turn around." Elijah didn't move. "Is there a warrant?" Harlow's jaw tightened. "We're conducting an immigration enforcement operation. You match a target description." "What target?" Elijah asked. "What name? What address?" Harlow said nothing. Behind Elijah, Pettis moved into position, cutting off the path to the front door. The 4 other agents spread across the driveway in a loose half-circle, hands on belts, eyes locked on the one man they had all apparently decided was the threat. Elijah looked directly at Harlow. His voice did not waver. "I am Deputy U.S. Marshal Elijah Drummond. My credentials are inside my vehicle. My badge is in my duty bag. You are standing in my driveway at my home where I have lived for 9 years." Harlow stared at him. The home security cameras captured what came next with perfect clarity. The audio was unmistakable. Harlow leaned forward, close enough that Elijah could feel the words on his face. "I don't care what you say you are. Around here, I give the orders." And in that moment, on his own property, in front of his own home, a 21-year federal officer with more service than every agent on that driveway combined was told that none of it mattered. Harlow moved without warning. His left hand shot forward, locked around Elijah's right wrist, and twisted it hard behind his back. The motion was fast, violent, and entirely unnecessary against a man who had not moved, had not raised his voice, had not done a single thing that any reasonable officer could interpret as resistance. Elijah's shoulder torqued under the pressure. He did not swing. He did not pull away. His voice stayed controlled even as pain flared through his arm. "You are assaulting a federal officer." Pettis was already moving. He grabbed Elijah's left arm from the other side and wrenched it back. Together, the 2 agents drove Elijah forward and slammed him face down onto the hood of his own SUV. The impact was hard enough to dent the metal. Elijah's forehead struck the edge of the roof rack with a sound that carried across the quiet street, sharp and unmistakable. A gash opened above his left eye. Blood ran immediately, streaking down the side of his face and onto the polished surface of the vehicle he had washed the day before in his own driveway on a Sunday afternoon while his sons played basketball 10 feet away. Harlow cuffed him. The metal bit into Elijah's wrists. He did not struggle. He lay still on the hood of his truck, bleeding, breathing through his nose, staring at the blurred reflection of tactical vests and drawn weapons in the paint. Behind them, one of the younger agents opened the rear door of the SUV and pulled out Elijah's duty bag. He unzipped it. Inside was a U.S. Marshal Service badge in a leather case, a federal credential with Elijah's photograph and full title, a service-issued firearm in a locked holster, a courthouse access card with his name, rank, and agency printed across the front. The agent held up the badge and froze. He looked at Harlow. Harlow glanced at it. His eyes lingered for half a second. Then he looked away. He did not remove the cuffs. He did not call for a medic. He did not apologize. He said 2 words. "We'll sort it out." And Elijah Drummond, a 21-year deputy U.S. Marshal with 2 Department of Justice commendations, remained face down on the hood of his own vehicle, bleeding from his own forehead, cuffed with his own hands behind his back, in his own driveway. The sound carried. The slam of a body against metal, the shouting, the sharp commands echoing off the quiet homes of Birchwood Lane at an hour when most families were still finishing breakfast. Franklin Gaines heard it first. He was 68 years old, a retired Marine colonel who had served 30 years, including 2 combat deployments, and he lived directly across the street from the Drummonds. He had known Elijah for 9 years. They shared beers on the 4th of July. Their sons had played on the same football team. Gaines stepped onto his porch and saw Elijah, face down on the hood of his SUV, blood running from above his eye, wrists cuffed behind his back, surrounded by 6 agents in tactical vests. His reaction was immediate. "That man is a United States Marshal. What the hell are you doing?" Harlow turned toward him. "Sir, go back inside. This doesn't concern you." Gaines didn't move. He reached into his pocket, pulled out his phone, and began recording. "It concerns me when federal agents assault my neighbor in his own driveway." 2 houses down, Susan Pratt, 55, a registered nurse, stepped outside in a bathrobe. She saw the blood on Elijah's face before she saw anything else. "That man is injured. He needs medical attention. Let me help him." "Stay back, ma'am," Pettis called out. "This is an active operation." From an upstairs window on the other side of the street, a retired schoolteacher named Helen Corley began recording silently on her tablet, capturing the full width of the driveway from an elevated angle that showed every agent, every vehicle, and every second of what was happening to a man she had watched coach neighborhood children for nearly a decade. Then the front door opened. Corinne Drummond stood in the doorway. She saw the tactical vehicles. She saw the agents. She saw her husband bleeding and cuffed on the hood of his own truck. The scream that came from her was not theatrical. It was the sound of a woman watching the one thing she feared most happen in real time. Behind her, Isaiah appeared. He was 11 years old, still in pajamas, and when he saw his father on the ground with blood on his face, he began to cry. Nolan, 14, stepped past his mother. His face was tight, his eyes locked on the agents. He did not cry. He pulled out his phone and started recording. And on every camera, from every angle, the evidence continued to build. Harlow grabbed Elijah by the cuff chain and pulled him off the hood. Blood from the gash above his eye had reached his chin, dripping onto his polo collar in a pattern the cameras captured with devastating clarity. Harlow walked him to the rear of an ICE vehicle and pushed him inside. Elijah's head nearly struck the doorframe. Then Harlow turned to his team. Secure the scene. That meant one thing. Stop the recording. Pettis crossed the street toward Franklin Gaines, phone raised and steady on his porch. "Sir, stop filming or you'll be arrested for obstruction." Gaines didn't flinch. "You just assaulted a federal officer in his own driveway." "I'm not going anywhere." Another agent approached Susan Pratt, who held up her nursing ID. "That man is bleeding from a head wound. I'm a medical professional. Let me assess him." She was told to leave. She didn't. From her upstairs window, Helen Corley kept recording in silence, her tablet propped against the glass at an angle none of the agents had noticed. Inside the vehicle, Elijah sat upright, blood still running down the left side of his face, and spoke with the calm certainty of a man who understood federal law better than anyone on that driveway. You need to contact the United States Marshal Service immediately. You have made a serious error, and it is getting worse by the minute. The agent nearest the door shifted his weight but said nothing. Outside, Harlow leaned toward Pettis, his back to the nearest camera, but not far enough to escape the audio. He probably bought that badge online. The microphone captured every syllable, every ounce of contempt. And inside the house, behind a door that had just closed, Corinne Drummond was already reaching for her phone. Corinne's hands were shaking, but her voice was not. She dialed the U.S. Marshal Service District Office from memory. A number saved under a name Elijah had told her to use if anything ever went wrong. She had never called it before. She identified herself, gave Elijah's badge number, his rank, his assignment, and described what was happening. "My husband is in handcuffs in the back of an ICE vehicle. He's bleeding from his head. They slammed him onto his own truck. There is no warrant. Our children are watching." 45 seconds later, Chief Deputy U.S. Marshal Raymond Booker was on the line. He was 56, a 28-year veteran who had little patience for incompetence and none for abuse. He listened for 60 seconds and said 5 words: "Do not hang up." Within 4 minutes, Booker had ICE's Regional Field Office Director on the phone. "You have one of my deputies in cuffs in his own driveway. He is bleeding. There is no warrant. Fix this in 5 minutes, or I'm calling the Inspector General, the DOJ Civil Rights Division, and every federal authority with jurisdiction." 3 minutes later, Harlow's phone rang. He listened. The color left his face. He walked to the vehicle, opened the door, and removed the cuffs without a word. No apology, no explanation. Elijah stepped out, wiped blood from his eye, and looked at Harlow for a long moment. Then he turned, walked across his own driveway, up his own steps, and to his wife, standing on the porch, with one arm around each of their sons. The door closed. On Birchwood Lane, 6 ICE agents stood in a driveway that was not theirs, next to a vehicle they had dented, surrounded by witnesses they had tried to silence, holding the wreckage of careers that were already over. They just didn't know it yet. The machinery of federal accountability moved fast when one of its own was on the ground bleeding. Within 3 hours of the incident, the U.S. Marshal Service had formally requested every piece of evidence connected to the operation on Birchwood Lane. All body camera footage from every agent present, all operational planning documents, all communication logs. The source of the tip that brought 6 agents to a deputy marshal's driveway, and the warrant, which did not exist, because there was no warrant. There had never been one. Elijah's home security system delivered what the federal request could not yet provide: 4 cameras, 4 angles, high-definition video with continuous audio covering the full duration of the encounter, from the moment the first ICE vehicle turned onto the street to the moment Harlow removed the cuffs. Franklin Gaines submitted his phone recording and a written statement. Susan Pratt did the same. Helen Corley provided her tablet footage from the upstairs window, an elevated angle that captured the full driveway and every agent's position throughout. Corinne Drummond gave a statement that included what no camera could fully convey: her 11-year-old son crying in his pajamas, her 14-year-old recording his father's blood on a phone screen. The Marshal Service referred the matter simultaneously to the DHS Office of Inspector General and the DOJ Civil Rights Division. Separately, Elijah's commanding officer made a second referral to the FBI's Public Corruption Unit. The language was precise and devastating. Federal agents may have filed false operational documents, assaulted a sworn federal officer, attempted to suppress witness recordings, and conducted a warrantless seizure in direct violation of the Fourth Amendment. By nightfall, 3 federal agencies were investigating 6 ICE agents, and the evidence was already overwhelming. Federal investigators started with the tip. The call that Harlow had used to justify rolling 6 agents and 4 tactical vehicles onto a residential street at 6 a.m. was a vague, anonymous report about a suspicious foreign male at 4412 Maple Court. The description referenced a male in his late 20s, approximately 5'7", with a heavy accent. Elijah Drummond was 43, stood 6'2", was born in Richmond, Virginia, and had lived at 4,638 Birchwood Lane for 9 years. Not the same street, not the same block, not even close. Investigators pulled Harlow's operational file for the morning. There was no proper plan, no supervisory authorization, no pre-operation briefing documented, no database check on the target address, no coordination with any other agency. Harlow had taken an unverified, anonymous call, skipped every required step, and launched a tactical operation against a home he had never confirmed was connected to anything. When investigators widened the scope, the pattern became impossible to ignore. Over the previous 3 years, Harlow had conducted 16 operations based on similarly unverified tips. Every single one targeted a home in a predominantly minority neighborhood. 11 resulted in unlawful detentions of individuals who had no connection to any immigration violation. 0 produced an actual arrest. Not one. Pettis had been present for 9 of those 16 operations. In every case, he filed supplemental reports that supported Harlow's version of events, using language so similar across reports that investigators flagged it as coordinated. The picture was no longer a single bad morning. It was a system. A pattern of warrantless, racially targeted operations run by an agent who had never been checked, backed by a subordinate who had never said no, and ignored by supervisors who had never looked closely enough to see what was right in front of them. The DHS Inspector General's preliminary report landed like a detonation. It described Harlow's unit as operating with reckless disregard for constitutional protections and a documented pattern of racially selective enforcement. The language was not cautious. It was not hedged. It was the kind of finding that ended not just careers, but entire command structures. The DOJ Civil Rights Division opened a formal investigation under 18 U.S.C. Section 242, Deprivation of Rights under Color of Law. The FBI's Public Corruption Unit added a parallel track focused on falsification of federal documents, citing the operational reports Harlow and Pettis had filed across 16 operations that bore no resemblance to what actually occurred. ICE headquarters in Washington received a classified briefing. The room included senior officials, agency attorneys, and a liaison from the Department of Homeland Security's Office of General Counsel. A senior official looked at the still frame from Elijah's home security camera, a deputy U.S. Marshal face down on his own vehicle, bleeding, cuffed, his children visible in the doorway behind him, and said what everyone already knew. He put hands on a deputy U.S. Marshal, in his driveway, in front of his children, with cameras rolling. This is not survivable. Harlow and Pettis were placed on immediate unpaid suspension. Their credentials, firearms, and badges were confiscated the same afternoon. The 4 remaining agents from the unit were placed on administrative leave pending individual review. None were permitted contact with Harlow or Pettis. None were permitted access to agency systems. The federal government was no longer reviewing what happened on Birchwood Lane. It was dismantling the unit that caused it. Elijah required 6 stitches above his left eye. The gash from the roof rack left a scar that would fade, but never fully disappear. His right wrist was sprained from the cuffing, swollen enough that he wore a brace for 2 weeks. But the physical injuries were the smallest part of what Harlow's team left behind. Isaiah was 11. He stopped going outside in the mornings. He asked to be driven to school instead of walking to the bus stop, something he had done independently since 3rd grade. He told his school counselor that he was afraid men with guns would come to the house again. He began waking at night, standing at his bedroom window, watching the street. Nolan was 14. He did not cry after that morning. He oscillated between a quiet, simmering rage and long stretches of silence that worried his parents more than any outburst could have. He had watched the video he recorded of his own father being slammed onto a truck and bleeding on camera. He watched it more than once before Corinne found out and asked him to stop. He became withdrawn. His grades dropped. He quit responding to texts from teammates. Corinne took a week off from her school, then another. She sat with her sons, drove them to counseling, held the household together while managing a fury she kept hidden from the boys, but could not keep from her voice when she spoke to attorneys. Elijah went back to work after 10 days, but every morning he paused at the front door before stepping outside. A man who had spent 2 decades breaching doors to arrest the most dangerous fugitives in the country now hesitated before walking into his own driveway. One night, after the boys were asleep, he sat beside Corinne on the couch and said quietly, "I've been in rooms with killers who showed me more respect than those agents did." The federal grand jury returned indictments against both men within 2 months. Vincent Harlow and Dwayne Pettis were charged with deprivation of rights under color of law, conspiracy, assault on a federal officer, and falsification of federal records. Harlow was offered a plea deal that would have reduced his sentence significantly. He rejected it. He told his attorney he was doing his job and that no jury would convict a federal agent for following a tip. He was wrong. At trial, the prosecution played Elijah's home security footage in its entirety. 4 angles, uninterrupted audio. The jury watched a calm, identified, compliant federal officer slammed face first onto his own vehicle. They watched blood run down his face. They watched his children appear in the doorway. They heard Harlow say, "I don't care what you say you are." They heard him tell Pettis he probably bought that badge online. Harlow's attorney argued good faith reliance on an anonymous tip. The prosecution dismantled it in minutes. The tip described a man in his late 20s at an address 2 blocks away. Elijah was 43, lived on a different street, and had been a federal officer for over 2 decades. There was no operational plan, no warrant, no database check, no supervisory approval. Franklin Gaines testified. Susan Pratt testified. Corinne testified about what her son saw that morning. Then Elijah took the stand and recounted every moment with the same calm precision that had made him one of the most effective deputies in his district. The jury deliberated for 5 hours. Guilty on all counts. Harlow was sentenced to 4 years and 3 months in federal prison. Pettis, who had cooperated partially during the investigation, pleaded guilty to reduced charges and received 22 months. Elijah filed a federal civil rights lawsuit against Harlow, Pettis, and the Department of Homeland Security. The complaint cited assault on a federal officer, warrantless seizure in violation of the Fourth Amendment, racial profiling, excessive force, and intentional infliction of emotional distress on his wife and children. DHS attorneys reviewed the home security footage, the witness recordings, the investigative findings, and the criminal convictions. They settled before trial. The amount was $3.4 million, among the largest individual payouts in an ICE misconduct case. But the money was not the point. As part of the settlement, ICE agreed to a series of mandatory reforms within the regional field office. Warrant verification required before any enforcement operation. Independent review of all tips before tactical deployment. Mandatory cross-referencing of target addresses with federal law enforcement databases. Enhanced body camera compliance with automatic penalties for non-activation. An independent civilian oversight panel for community operations, with authority to review complaints and recommend disciplinary action. 3 supervisors above Harlow who had ignored or buried prior complaints were formally disciplined. 1 was forced into early retirement. 1 was demoted 2 grades and reassigned. A 3rd was transferred out of the region and permanently stripped of supervisory authority. Harlow's federal law enforcement certification was revoked permanently. He would never carry a badge again in any capacity. Pettis was barred from federal employment for life. His name was entered into a national database flagging former officers terminated for misconduct. The system that had protected both men for years did not protect them when the evidence was undeniable, the victim was a fellow federal officer, and every second of the abuse had been captured on camera from 4 angles with audio that left nothing to interpretation. Months later, Elijah Drummond walked out of his front door at 6:10 a.m. with his duty bag over his shoulder. He paused on the porch for a moment, the way he still did every morning, then stepped down and crossed the driveway to his SUV. The dent in the hood had been repaired. The scar above his left eye had faded to a thin line, but was still visible in certain light. He set his bag in the back seat, started the engine, and drove to the federal courthouse the same way he had driven it 1,000 times before. He walked through security, nodded to the deputies at the entrance, and sat down at his desk in the Fugitive Task Force office. His badge was clipped to his belt. His credentials were in his pocket. He did the job he had done for 21 years. At home, the security camera still ran. 4 angles, audio-enabled, recording every car that turned onto Birchwood Lane, every footstep on the driveway, every moment of every day. Isaiah had started going outside again. He walked to the bus stop most mornings now, though he still looked over his shoulder more than an 11-year-old should. Nolan had returned to football. He was quieter than before, but he was there, and his coaches said he played harder than anyone on the field. Corinne still watched from the window every morning until Elijah's SUV pulled out of the driveway and disappeared around the corner. She never told him. He never asked. Across town, Vincent Harlow sat in a federal detention facility. His badge was gone. His pension was gone. His name now appeared in federal law enforcement training materials under the heading Case Study, Unlawful Warrantless Seizure and Assault on a Fellow Federal Officer. He was used as an example of everything an agent should never become. Back on Birchwood Lane, Franklin Gaines still sat on his porch most mornings with a cup of coffee and a clear view of the street. He waved when Elijah left for work. Elijah waved back. The street was quiet again. But the cameras were always on. Now, watching footage like this, it can really stick with you, right? Some of these clips stay in your head, especially late at night when you're trying to fall asleep. And speaking of sleep, a lot of you have told me you're waking up at 2 or 3 a.m. and just lying there. Can't shut your mind off. And the next day you're dragging through everything. I came across a simple 21-day sleep guide that's helped thousands of people fix exactly that. No pills, no apps, no gadgets, just a step-by-step plan that actually works. It's only $15. I put the link in the description if you want to check it out. All right, I'll catch you in the next one.